Hi, hello, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the session with new partnerships from crisis management to destination resilience. Now, in the last 2 years of the global pandemic, the word resilience has come to the fore. Originally, actually, it was an individual psychological term and described nothing else but the capability of a person that does not allow themselves to be thrown off course by strokes of fate, but quickly gets back on their feet and manages life as before. That concept has taken on, and it is being used in many areas, but nowadays and today, especially in this ITB session, we are going to concentrate on destination resilience. Now, what does that mean? How can you encourage it? What do you need? Who do you need to get on board in order to create that, which is, of course, an ongoing issue? And the question is resilience more important than sustainability, which we've heard a number of years ago, or is it part and parcel of the same development? Now, we will be discussing these questions with three experts, with three project partners in a moment. But first of all, we'd like to listen to the opening remarks and the explanation of the State Secretary in the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, Bärbel Kofler. Here is her speech.
Representatives of the tourism industry, guests of ITB, ladies and gentlemen, 150,000 visitors, 10,000 exhibitors from 180 countries worldwide. This would be the ITB figures under normal circumstances. The COVID-19 pandemic has put a complete stop to that. But luckily, the virtual world offers alternatives. Of course, it is not only the ITB that is suffering losses. With the pandemic, tourism has almost ground to a standstill. In 2019, international tourist arrivals amounted to roughly 1.4 billion. In 2021, that number has down to 350 million. The share of tourism in global GDP has dropped by almost 50%. At least 62 million jobs have been lost. This is a crisis for travel agents and the hospitality sector in Germany. For the tourism sector in developing countries and emerging economies, it's an economic catastrophe. Because for many developing countries, tourism is an important economic factor on which they depend heavily. In countries such as the Philippines, tourism accounts for 1/4 of GDP and provides 20% of all jobs. It is common in tourism that a lot of people work in the informal sector. Women, poorer people from rural areas who have no savings to fall back on and no form of social protection. They are particularly hard hit because most often there is no public support. 3 years ago, we were discussing over-tourism. Now we are looking at downturns and crashes. But every crisis is also an opportunity. Let us rethink tourism, ecologically sustainable, with decent jobs and respect for people and culture. Let us help tourism and its employees get back on their feet sustainably. That is the task we have given ourselves at the German Development Ministry. With our COVID-19 response measures for tourism, we have set up projects amounting to some 20 million euros. We are using these funds to give startups and young innovative businesses a helping hand and to promote digital upskilling and training. We've included the protection of biodiversity and of World Heritage sites in this program. This helps to protect nature even if tourism ceases to be a source of revenue. And we want to make destinations resilient against future crises, because tourism is the lever for sustainable development. Sustainable tourism helps to improve local infrastructure, involves the local population in economic cycles, generates funds for conserving natural assets, and gives women in particular an opportunity to participate in economic life. The BMZ is promoting exactly this kind of tourism. And we need to make this type of tourism crisis resilient vis-à-vis health crisis, but also vis-à-vis the impacts of climate change. The pandemic has shown how important prevention and preparedness are. The better prepared governments and companies are, the more targeted their response can be in a crisis and the less damage will happen. I'm very pleased that we are able to welcome our partners from the International Labour Organization, the Pacific Asia Travel Association and the German Committee for Disaster Reduction at the panel discussion that will follow. They will be giving a deeper insight into risk-informed management for resilient destinations. In Germany and Europe, travel agents are looking towards the summer with hope. In many developing countries, the recovery will likely only begin in 2023. But if by then we have managed to make the tourism sector more sustainable and resilient, we will have achieved something.
Thank you, Mrs. Kofler. And here they are, three of the partners in the project, Risk-Informed Management for Resilient Tourism. And with those people that I'm going to introduce just in a second, we will discuss the prerequisites that they are in the process of identifying to turn any tourism destination into a resilient tourism area. Now, from Singapore, we're being joined by Liz Ortiguera, CEO, Pacific Asia Tourism Association, PATA. And thank you very much, Liz, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we'll also be hearing from Benni Thiebes. He's the director of the German Committee for Disaster Risk Preparedness. He's joining us from Bonn, so just down the road. And last but not least, from South Africa, we have Gary Rynhart. He is the Senior Employer Specialist of the ILO, East Africa and Switzerland. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Conny. Good afternoon.
Now, I've already sort of given the individual description of what makes somebody resilient. That is somebody who gets back on their feet and manages life as before. Of course, with organizations, especially with tourism destinations, that's completely different. Now, your organizations have a different take on what tourism destination resilience is. So maybe you share that with us right at the beginning. Liz, maybe you would like to start.
Yes, I'm happy to start. Our tourism destination resilience program focuses first on educating on the difference between destination marketing and destination management. We then look at identifying potential vulnerabilities and risk assessments in various categories, and risk management. And then lastly, we work in supporting the destinations in scoping adaptive capacity opportunities.
Thank you so much. And of course, your organization is spanning several countries in Southeast Asia, in Asia, and you were going to be talking about that in a moment. Now, Benni, it's quite amazing, actually, that the German Committee for Disaster Risk Preparedness is part and parcel of this, but it seems to be your core business to be prepared. So how do you actually prepare a whole region?
Yeah, within this project, we have this goal of increasing the resilience of tourism destinations. And because we are not experts in tourism, we partnered up with Futuris, which is the German initiative for sustainability in tourism. And we've basically started with defining what is resilience, because for many people, this is simply the robustness to withstand a shock or stress or any negative impact. But we try to see that a bit more holistically by looking at all the capacities that destinations have to anticipate, to prevent, to resist, and to absorb, adapt, respond, recover to these shocks and stresses. And all this should lead to the ability of a destination to go onto the path of risk-informed, climate-sensitive, sustainable development.
We've heard all the right words. We're going to explain about them in a second. Gary Rynhart, it's not quite astonishing that the ILO is involved, even though ILO and tourism is something that's certainly new for me. We've lost a hell of a lot of jobs during the pandemic, especially also in tourism. So what's the ILO's take?
Yeah, good afternoon, Conny, and good afternoon, everybody. From the ILO's perspective, being a tripartite organisation, we're coming at resilience really from a perspective of building resilience within enterprises, making enterprises safe, inclusive areas for workers. So that's the overall approach. Tourism is a hugely important sector for us. In terms of it's such an employment-rich sector, and not only is it an employment-rich sector, it's one that provides lots of entry-level employment. It's critical for development policy, and it's also dispersed often around an economy. So it provides employment often in areas that there usually isn't some. So it's a hugely important sector for us, and we will be coming at it really from that kind of dual angle, building resilience in enterprises, safety and inclusivity for workers.
Well, thank you very much for this sort of quick definition. We're now going to go into the deep dive. And let's start off with Benni. I've heard two key words, of course, resilience, the word of the day, but also sustainability. Now, we've been talking about sustainability for so many years. What's new in the new approach?
Yeah, basically, resilience constitutes a shift towards more preparedness and risk management instead of pure crisis management. So you actually want to know about the risks before they materialize and really affect you. So it's basically just a more proactive and risk-informed approach than you have with crisis management alone. But of course, crisis management is an integral part of resilient destinations because you will never be able to prevent all negative impacts. So I think it's also important to point out that there is no contradiction between sustainability and resilience. It's not about that resilience is trying to be now the only concept that is viable. It's rather that sustainability is the goal and resilience is the path that leads us there.
I've heard the word risk, and we're going to go back to that because, of course, risk is something that tourists normally don't want to hear, but you have a different take on that. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Let's turn to Asia. Now, as I mentioned before, your working area encompasses many, many different countries, and we're talking about empowering areas, destination areas. How important are partnerships across countries, and how important are partnerships on the ground?
Well, I'll describe that PATA is actually, the strength of its network is its public and private memberships and partnerships. So we span across Asia Pacific, and our mission is responsible tourism and travel development to, from, and within Asia Pacific. So what's interesting is our network spans beyond Asia Pacific. There's great expertise and knowledge in the other continents as well, and so we create those connections. In developing this destination resilience program, we've tapped into our vast network of players within the travel ecosystem, ranging from universities to multinationals, SMEs, consultancies. So it really is a very rich network of a lot of expertise, and we were able to pull in 20 plus experts to create this program. With knowledge, including ecotourism, tourism entrepreneurship, of course, sustainable tourism, environmental advisory, risk management, all of those areas of expertise coming into one program.
And I believe you have something called Crisis Resource Center. Could you share that with us?
Yes, we launched that towards the beginning of the pandemic, and it's a rich resource center that's open to everyone in the industry, and it has I should say everyone in the sector, because travel consists of many industries, and so depending on what industry, whether it's hospitality, aviation, or others, there are playbooks there, and depending on what stage you are in the crisis, you can tap into these guides to help you prepare plans. And then, TDR, as we call our Destination Resilience Program, is a continuation or an outgrowth of that. But it's more, I would say the big difference is that it's more strategic. It's laying that foundation to anticipate, where you need to build up your resiliencies to enable sustainability and ultimately prepare for growth.
Thank you very much. And of course, the Asian area was particularly hit, and maybe already that was the first call to order after the tsunami. But this pandemic has definitely sort of made it very clear that resilience is an important factor. And we're going to be going a bit more into depth in a second. Let's go to Gary. We have an industry, of course, that hardly has big employers. A couple, yes, but normally it's small and medium-sized companies, it's individuals, it's maybe family enterprises. So how do you actually cooperate with these small entities? How do you actually bring about a risk-informed mindset? How do you actually convey the knowledge to many rather than to a couple?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big challenges, isn't it? You know, you have such a dispersed sector, you know, with a lot of small enterprises in it, much more so than other sectors, and you're asking them to do something extra. You're asking them potentially to pay for something extra in terms of developing a resilience strategy, a continuity strategy, a contingency plan. I think the key is, you know, I mean, the pandemic in many respects has proven the business case for resilience. It's shown, you know, that an event happening in a wet market in Wuhan can have global consequences, economic, social, political, in a very short space of time. So I think that business case has been made, and you're seeing supply chains all over the world still disrupted. And pressure from larger companies, I think now increasingly will look, you know, in the past would say, do you have a contingency plan? Do you have plans in effect if something goes wrong? I think increasingly you'll see them demanding that from suppliers. So I think the thing is across the sector is to work with these small enterprises to make it easy for them, to incentivize them to do it, and that's where conversations with insurance companies, financial services, where you can get cheaper access to money, finance, cheaper insurance premiums, all of those kinds of things can incentivize take up of this, because ultimately what you're asking them to do is invest in an insurance policy. And I think the big selling point for me would be, you know, looking back over the last 2 years, it is a proof that, you know, it's not a question of if things go wrong, it is a question of when they go wrong. And when they go wrong can be a small thing, or it can be a potentially huge thing, which ultimately may knock your business over. But ultimately, if you have some kind of a plan, you've got a much better chance of coming out the other end.
Yeah, and of course, being very topical, we still don't know the sort of waves that are the outcome of the new crisis that everybody is facing, the Ukraine crisis. So let me turn to Benni again. And I said the word risk is something that people usually don't like to hear. I mean, you know, cognitively, yes, and being a manager, yes, you have to think about risk. But on the whole, it seems to be a no word in tourism. On the other hand, you actually have found a couple of examples where that actually can be a pro, like risk awareness as a selling point for a destination.
Yeah, over the past years, I've talked to many tourist experts, and they always said, no, you cannot communicate risk. We are the industry that is about careless, about holidays, that you don't have to care about anything. Everything is fine. It's perfect beaches and everything. And this sounds very reasonable, but I do not think that this is really true. I do not believe this. Just some decades ago, it was not the normal for ski lift operators to have any avalanche warning. And today we have that everywhere. Every major ski resort has a avalanche warning. They tell you how dangerous it is, and people expect this today. So there is a very proactive communication of risks, and people do not mind it. They actually like it. And I'm still in this process of collecting more similar examples. One would be that major cruise ships, they do advertisement that they have medical services on board. So there's another proactive communication of risk. And another example would be decompression chambers that certain diving destinations have in case of something goes wrong while you're diving. And I think we have some good examples where proactive risk communication is being carried out, and I think we should do more about that. It might take some time until we do that for all major risks. For the time being, it's only some small examples, but we are working on that, of course.
I believe I heard Gary say it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I'd like to sort of play that over to Liz. It seems like we need to change the narrative. Tourism being part of normal life, and you have risks in normal life. And unfortunately, a lot of tourism destinations in Asia suffered, especially, I believe, tourism went down to a fifth of original numbers. So Liz, when you talk to your partner organization, when you talk to tourism managers, how open are they to the conversation? How eager are they? And what kind of concepts are there that you co-develop?
Well, I would say there's a rise in, coming from both the government and the enterprise level, but also from the consumers. We are seeing research statistics that show post-pandemic, there's a rise of the conscious traveler. So travelers want to know that that they're going to a healthy destination. And I think, destinations can benefit from investing in that in a deep way, and they can market that, they can communicate that, because I think a new era of social responsibility is rising. And that's, propelled by things like COP26 and certainly other dialogues, like I mentioned, at the public, at the private, and at the consumer level.
Thank you very much. Gary, when we look sort of at the African destinations and at your cooperation partners, at your project partners, again, are they demanding solutions from you? Are you co-developing solutions? And where do you look for solutions? Maybe you've already found some. I know it's early days.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, in the conversations we've been having, and again, key partners for us would be, national representative organizations of the sector, across the sector, apex organizations representing all of the different parts. One of the key narratives coming across, exactly what Benni and Liz have been saying, the building the brand around resilience, and Benni's point is really, I think it's fantastic, because, you get onto an airplane and you're traveling to a destination and you're hearing alarming things like a life jacket, whistle, brace, get ready to hit the water, and nobody thinks a word of it. You land in a destination, why shouldn't the same criteria be in place in the destination you're after? So I think that idea is part of this kind of building the brand. And then to Liz's point, again, equally important around risks from social and environmental factors. So, to date, the ESG, this environmental, social and governance investing is absolutely massive. It's one in maybe $2 out of every $4 is an ESG fund. It's hugely important. The environmental part has been a bit of a focus for the tourism sector, because it is, again, it's a big greenhouse gas emitter, about 8%. There's a bit of a negative story around that. There's a much more positive story potentially around the social component of that. As I said, tourism is a big employer. It's got a big impact in local kind of communities. The money that comes in there funds all kinds of wonderful kinds of projects. So that is a space I think that is going to be extremely important in building this kind of resilience brand and risk brand, because that is definitely sort of part of the risk component.
I'm sorry if my association is wrong, but of course, a big part of the attraction of going to certainly the southern African areas are sort of, going to the both nature destinations and seeing the big five. And of course, you're being warned there as well how to behave. How can you maybe communicate that both to management and to tourists at the same time, that there are certain rules and regulations that need to be followed in order to not just be sustainable, but also resilient?
I think you probably will see, as we start to emerge from the worst of the pandemic, and tourism numbers definitely are shooting up, not to the levels they were, but they are going that way. I think like destinations like in Southern Africa, where you have a big nature draw, I think well positioned, I think, and there's a good bit of enthusiasm here, certainly in South Africa, in terms of attracting numbers back for maybe longer as well. There's a lot of pent-up demand that has been suppressed over the last 2 years. So there is a good level of enthusiasm here, and I think a good sense that it's been an opportunity. Maybe it's been such a difficult time for the sector. It really has, and there's many businesses just have not made it. Particularly, Connie, as you say, there's so many small businesses in the sector. They just haven't been able to make it. But I think there is enthusiasm that as we move kind of forward, there's lots of opportunities, and there's lots of ways to maybe think about doing things differently. And I think there has been certainly for the bigger companies, time over the last 2 years to kind of maybe put in place some of those strategies. As I said, the ESG bit, I think, is something that I would see coming through quite strongly, and it, as a way to attract people to destinations. Like here in South Africa, GDP contribution of tourism about 11%. It's an employer, probably about 800,000 directly, indirectly, massively. That's a massive amount of maybe 2-3 million families. So coming here, putting money into the economy, into dispersed parts of the country is a really big social thing to do. It's a real help of the biggest problem in this country right now, which is unemployment.
Absolutely, and let's mirror that in Benni's experience and observations. Now, it sounds, and your project, of course, is backed by the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, but that it does need a financial input. Again, where do you get the money from if it's not the BMZ? And where do you incentivize your partners in the project to look for finances?
Yes, some of the changes that are necessary to reach really sustainability might cost money, but it will pay off in the mid or long term. Because if you destroy your destination, like, for example, if you destroy all the mangroves, then you don't have spawning areas for your fish, and then you do not have a diving destination anymore. But at the same time, these mangroves also provide protection against erosion and against the effects of storms. So you have to find these synergies. And like with the example of avalanche warnings, this is not something that really costs something. It's just a more proactive communication of risks. And I think that if you focus on these synergies and if you advertise your prevention and preparedness measures, then you might have more consumers in the end, because they would prefer that.
Thank you so much. Liz, I have still in mind that you've built this CRC, an information platform, something that people can go to. Now, of course, in a crisis, certainly in a natural catastrophe, it's difficult to actually access it, because often IT and electricity will be hindered. But under normal circumstances, in this phase of building back better, this is enormously important. So how do people access this knowledge, and what kind of level of cooperation partners are you looking at? Are you looking at national governments, representatives in tourism? Are you looking at tourism managers, or are you also targeting the small and medium-sized enterprises?
So we're deploying the online training at the National Tourism Organization level, and as a next step, it's going to the subnational level, provinces and city level or village level, even, depending on where the national government would like to focus. And so that is our primary audience. But again, I think the stakeholders, once we start with that top-down education, the stakeholders are multifaceted on the ground level. So it's really important that all the elements of whether it's support emergency services or it's the tourism community in those local communities get involved. So it does, it's expansive, I'll say, but we need to start with the ones that have management in their hands for these destinations.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. Again, Gary, you said also in the long run, and we've heard Benni saying in the long run it will all pay off, and you gave the rationale why you have to put money where your mouth is, and seeing that tourism is such an important industry and cash cow for countries. The question is still, in the short run, how do you support the individual small, medium-sized companies, the person that's renting out a hut, the person that's he or she is running this tiny excursion organization? How do you support them in order to actually get the benefits in the long run?
Yeah, I think, a key thing for a small business is identification of your key risks, and that can be honestly something that is done really simply with some simple tools. It can be for a small restaurant, maybe in an area that gets flooding, having an agreement with another restaurant up the road where stock could be kind of stored at a higher ground level, or a small business that is prone to, say, outages of electricity. Again, sharing costs with other small businesses in the area to purchase a generator. Things like that, I think, can be identified, and they can be potentially game savers. I do recall, just to digress for a second, I do recall when we were developing some of the tools, there was a small farmer in Fiji, was one of the case studies, and a very micro business, and she had beehives, 14 of them, and she made a number of bee-related products. And Fiji, of course, it's a high tourism destination, but also gets a lot of very bad weather systems. Her farm was in a kind of a valley. All of the beehives were at the bottom of the valley. The weather system comes over, it will knock her out completely. So by simply shifting half to higher ground, different part of the farm, she's halved her risk. And then she has her stock, which is non-perishable. She's fortunate in that. Again, splitting it into two, putting half of it with her brother in town, has halved her risk. So I think things like that and communicating those kind of things. Look, there's simple things you can do. Spend half a day thinking about them. Could potentially save your business.
I love it. We need the big concepts, but we also sort of need the good little examples, little in brackets, of course. Liz, does anything come to mind from your partner organizations where you've already seen a little shift?
Well, we work on many projects, I'd say, and that's important to note, is that taking the conceptual to the ground level. And so we're looking forward to seeing how, because we've only taken our program so far to the subnational level. But, there are many projects. For example, we do work with informal workers in Bangkok. We had a pilot there where we were training them on things like health and safety practices, taking an antigen test, wearing a mask, learning how to pivot your business. These are people in the lowest income jobs in tourism, and that's where jobs are created. Teaching them to cater to domestic travelers. and how to get online to publicize their offering. So, grassroots and on the ground actions are very important to us to demonstrate and just demonstrate best practice models. And I would say that this is a time when, being sustainability and resilience is not necessarily the easier path, but it is the more intelligent solutions. And so we need to do what we can to accelerate the learnings across markets and across destinations so that these are adopted, because they're not the most intuitive necessarily, but they are the most strategically important and the most intelligent.
Again, being a journalist, I always love these smaller examples. So, Benni, anything that you can share with us? You had a couple of examples, but they were sort of stemming from, let me say, the northern half, where you can still find snow. But if there's no snow, there's probably not an avalanche. But what can you tell about all the partner countries?
Yeah, we have had a project before that, and we didn't focus on the destination resilience, but rather on the resilience of guest houses, resorts, and hotels. And there was a huge set of indicators to describe the risks that they are faced with, their ability to manage these risks. So is there a generator, and is it probably placed in the wrong place, like in the basement where it's going to be flooded very soon? And there were also a lot of indicators that described the management systems around that. So where's the next fire station, for example? And I think that this is quite a best practice for how certain hotels and resorts can prepare themselves and assess their resilience to certain risks. And I think this is creates a nice synergy and a win-win-win situation between the operators of the hotel, because they can be more sure that their hotel will be running even if there is a certain risk materializing. Also for the people staying there, because they know in case there is a failure of the major electricity, then we have a generator and we have drinking water and medical supplies, for example. But it also helps the people in the place, in the area that work there, and so their livelihoods are more secure.
What I've now heard a number of both individual examples. I've also heard you mentioning, all three of you mentioning, that you need this cooperation. You need an approach of getting more than just the players on the ground on board, in the true sense of the word. So you also need the systems approach, and probably not just, again, what I've heard from you, not just in the tourism industry as such, but in a wider industry. So would you consider yourself as a kind of convener of new ideas of embedding tourism in the wider area of the destination? And maybe Liz, you could pick that up. Like, how do you actually get everybody on board and then get traction?
Multiple forums, and I think if this pandemic taught us anything, it taught us, the scale and the scope of that, travel touches across many industries, whether they're domestic or, even if they weren't designed for travelers to come in. So I think that having that cross-industry forum, whether it's at a very super local level or at a strategic policy making level, certainly is where we find opportunities to forge best practices and bring alignment and sharing.
And Gary, maybe pick up on that example, and also maybe how do tourism areas, destination areas, identify themselves as more than directed to tourism?
Look, I think the policy part is very important, and I think when rolling out training schemes and training tools around resilience, around contingency planning, there's an excellent opportunity to gather data from participant firms of all sizes, and then that can feed into kind of a policy discourse with government. So I think that's a critical thing. You can train folks. You can also gather good information on what their problems are, and then that can help in terms of discussions with government. But I do think it's back to this kind of destination branding, branding the region. It was one of Liz's colleagues when we were talking in the last time with the prep for this call, said it wasn't destinations don't fail. SMEs that haven't prepared will fail. I think that's fantastic, and that's really kind of a good tagline. So I think this kind of communication and awareness across the sector, led from by the associations, really important, and just kind of simple kind of narratives around like basic kind of plans can potentially save your business, and then building that into the kind of the brand, the stuff that Benny talked about, this promoting risk, that we've done our homework, we've actually thought about the things that can go wrong, and we're prepared. So come here.
I'm happy that you didn't say where you should go, because of course we're almost spanning the globe, and right at the moment I see that we need to come to a close, even though conversation is highly interesting and also very targeted. So before you tell me, as sort of in a final go, what the three most important issues are that you're tackling right at the moment, let me just sort of reiterate that when we're talking about the BMZ sponsored project, Risk-Informed Management for Resilient Tourism, we're talking about a multi-level approach in which you all get many different actors together that then build both brand and crisis awareness and of course the resilience for a certain destination. Now the challenge is for each of you to sort of come up with these three issues, and I know that you're all discussing amongst each other, so even if you mention them double, it's okay. That's why one is in this network. And let me ask Benni, let's say, as somebody is sort of looking at tourism and other areas, what are the three most important things that you think from your previous or from your experience up to now, people or destination managers and companies need to take along?
Okay, I would say that the first one would be that we have to admit that life is risky and so is tourism. And then we have to agree that prevention is cheaper and preparedness works. And this is something that we can use for advertisement as well. So that's why I would argue for a more proactive risk communication and risk management. And then, very importantly, let's focus on the synergies that we can create. There are a lot of synergies that we can use to create a more sustainable situation that at the same time help to make it, to reduce risks and to help us to deal with risks in a better way.
And throw the ball over to Gary's field.
Maybe the first thing is to move away from siloed approaches to risk. That it can be a whole range of things that can impact on your business. So looking at all different ranges of hazards within your own context, that'd be the first thing. Second thing, trying as best you can, taking a sector-wide approach. Sharing the risk across the sector, getting leadership within the sector through associations, and all of those kinds of things I think are pretty important. And then the last is the opportunity. Looking at this as a kind of an opportunity to build back better, as they say, and to build this into your systems going forward.
And Liz, last but not least.
And well, our program focused on 5 resiliencies, so I'll pick 3. Number 1, health and safety, and that's risk mitigation, doing things like vaccine equity, ensuring that even the poor nations have the basics. And economic travel is a jobs growth engine, and so right now we have an urgent need to address poverty alleviation. It was a jobs creator, but now it's those are the jobs that have been most impacted and depleted. So getting in a safe manner, managing risk, getting those jobs up and running across the region is really critical. And then third, of course, I would put environment. When the travel does come back, there are risks of over tourism, and we don't want to. People appreciate, they don't want the environment to go back to the polluted areas that it was before, perhaps. And so we can build back better, and I echo that wish and mission.
And that leaves me only to say thank you very much to the three of you. I'm looking very much forward to talking to you again next year, because this project has been going on for a year. You've already had enormous results and enormous traction. Keep up the good work. Destination resilience, not a buzzword, but something concrete to work for, without forgetting about the fact that we're talking about sustainable tourism, and that's here to stay. Thank you very much, and also to each and every one of you who has listened to us. Thank you. I'm quite sure all our participants are happy to go into correspondence if you take the initiative. So, see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.